Hello and welcome to the Hometown Church podcast. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jesse Rosskamp, and I am joined, as always, by Pastor Brent Knox.
Hi, good to see you today.
Good to see you, and Pastor Deacon Ailes.
Hi, it is also good to see you.
It is also good to see me. Yeah, I agree. Today, we've got a lot going on. We're going to be hanging out. We're continuing our journey through the Gospel of Mark. We've been focusing on the message, mission, and identity of Jesus as they're revealed through Mark's Gospel. So today, we got a loaded one for you. Mm-hmm. We got Mark chapter 13. This is the big one. This is the one that people love to talk about and debate and take very strong sides on. And so we're going to cover all that today. Jesus has made his way to Jerusalem for the Passover. We're right in the middle of Holy Week. He's been spending the days leading up to the feast, speaking in the temple, being challenged by Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, and many others that are trying to get him to slip up so they can arrest him. Now he and his disciples, they make their way out of the city, and Jesus takes the opportunity in private to reveal to his followers things that are yet to come. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, things that are yet to come, or perhaps have already come to pass. That's all stuff that we are going to be talking about today. So before we jump into it, Brent, let's get some context going a little bit for this chapter.
Well, I think you've created some of the context. Jesus last week, the rejection of the religious leaders seems to have happened. Walking out of the temple, the disciples are admiring the temple, and Jesus says something really shocking. He says this temple is going to be utterly destroyed. One stone is not going to be left on another. And how shocking must have that been for the disciples, whom this temple is their identity. It's their religious center, and evidently that got under the skin of some of the disciples, because later they're sitting on the Mount of Olives that's overlooking the temple there, and 4 disciples come to Jesus asking Jesus 2 big questions. When's this going to happen? And presumably meaning, when is the temple going to be destroyed? And then what sign is going to show us that these things are about to be fulfilled? And Jesus launches into a very curious discourse on future things, which we Christians have been debating about ever since he said it.
Yeah, a source of much debate for the Christian community.
And much interest. Yeah. Who's not interested in end times?
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, I think so. It's a fun conversation, at least. But we're going to get into this thing. We're going to break it up into 2 parts. We're going to start with verses 1 through 13 and have a little conversation. Then we're going to get into the back half of the chapter and kind of break down the 3 biggest views when it comes to end times. And each of us will kind of talk a little bit. We'll discuss amongst ourselves, and then we'll finish up with just kind of a what's next for us. What does this mean for us? How should we respond to these different things? So we'll get going here. I got my ESV open to chapter 13, verses 1 through 13. It says this: "And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, 'Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings.' And Jesus said to him, 'Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down.' And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?' And Jesus began to say to them, 'See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of birth pains. Be on your guard, for they will deliver you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. And when they bring you to trial and deliver you over, do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. And brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved." Mark chapter 13. Verses 1 through 13. So let's talk about this passage a little bit, and Deacon, maybe we'll start with you here. So Jesus is talking here, and he specifically says that these wars and earthquakes and famines, that they're not a sign of the end, but just the beginning of birth pains. So let's talk about a little bit about what that means and what that reveals about the patterns of the world.
What that means and what that reveals about the patterns of the world. Yeah. So, we were just having this conversation right before we started rolling, our secret conversations that you guys never get to hear. But that I feel like I always cue into every time I'm on here. But yeah, so here we have in the beginning, hey, there's not going to be one of these great buildings. There's not going to be one left here. There will not, sorry, I'm reading the ESV. And there's a little bit of Yoda going on,
a little
which
bit.
is one of the reasons I switched. Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down, right? And so he starts talking about this stuff, and then, and they're kind of freaking out, right? And he says, see that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name saying that I'm that person. So when we're talking about what this time is, we were just discussing this, and is this a sign of the end? Is this not a sign of the end? I want to make sure I'm not losing the thread of your question. This to me is a sign that we need to be ready, and we need to not respond like the rest of the world responds when they see wars coming, when they see famines, when they see earthquakes coming. But what's the thread of your question? I want to make sure I'm getting
what's he talking about here? What kind of patterns? I guess what I'm trying to get at is that what Jesus is talking about here is that these are things that have been throughout the history of the world, that are currently and will continue to be. And so I think people a lot of times will take these things and kind of look at them and be like, look, Jesus is coming back. Time is now.
Yeah.
And Jesus is more so saying here, like, no, these things will happen, but here's your job. Here's what you got to do.
Yeah. It's almost like a description of the sin's effect in the world, and the sin's effect in the world it's always been there. There's been always messiahs that have been rising up and deceiving many. It's not the end yet. Nations are going to go against war. I mean, they want to know that that's been going on forever. And as a matter of fact, when a time of crisis comes, and it's happened all through history, Christians, believers will say, well, is this the end? Is this the end? World War I was an example of that. There was a great fervency of wondering, a great study of end times prophecy in churches all over the country. At World War I happened again in World War II. And I remember even in my lifetime with the invention of nuclear weapons and how some of the plagues look like in Zechariah, where eyes are going to melt out of people's heads and things. Oh, that's got to be talking about nuclear weapons. The end is near. And so there's always been a interest in when a crisis hits, or we toward in the end of the world. But this passage might just be simply saying, this is the state of the world.
Yeah, this is the point of the birth pains that we're experiencing, that we're feeling, that all creation has been subjected to groaning, right? The earthquakes, the famines, these things that we're experiencing aren't necessarily a sign that, hey, tomorrow I'm coming back, but this is what we're experiencing. This is what we will experience until that day when things are coming. But yeah, I mean, the Spanish flu, COVID, I remember the blood moon stuff and how big a deal that was. Like, oh, here comes this blood moon, but it's also a super moon, and it's these kinds of things. So pack your bags.
Well, even at the turn of the millennium, at 1000, the first millennium, there was a huge interest and a huge fear. Sure. Just that calendar flip at the year 1000, then 2000
I
with
remember
Y2K.
that one.
Yeah.
And there was is this the crisis that's going to bring Jesus Christ back?
Yeah. And now we're coming up on about 2,000 years since Jesus, like the literal 2,000 years since Jesus' ministry and his death and resurrection. Things are just going to keep kind of winding up. But like every generation of Christian has thought that we're the last one. We're the last one. Like Jesus is coming back soon. I think that's intentional too. Like Jesus' teaching is specifically meant to like get his followers to be like, hey, I could come back at any moment.
Could be imminent.
Yeah.
Could be right now.
And we'll talk more about it, because I think that there's a lot here in Mark 13 that points us to that. But I'll never forget, I got married May 21st, 2011. Are you proud of me, honey? And there were billboards that were going up Maybe you remember this, maybe you don't. You might not have even been born, Jesse. I'm not sure. But there was fire on the billboard, and it said, May 21, 2011, he's coming back. And I was like, wedding guest. Sweet. Sweet. But people were up in arms about it. And he had, this one guy had specific reasons as to why he thought this would happen. Now, this was also, I think, his third or fourth time he had done this.
He had his math all figured out, I remembered.
Yeah.
Right.
And people would sell their houses.
Right.
And they would give him money so that he could get these billboards up and everything. But I just remember, I'll never forget the fiery thing, like on the way to here at hometown to get married, being like, well, I guess here it comes.
Yeah. You could have had the best wine, dude, at your wedding.
It would have been amazing. Yeah. Yep. Well, we were here, so we didn't have anyone.
No. Yeah. So let's maybe just talk a little bit about, like, so what does that mean for us? Like, what does this passage kind of teach us about what our role through all of this should be?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, he's got a lot of strong worded things. I went back to the CSB, and here in verse 5, Jesus told them, watch out that no one deceives you. Mm. So there's one of our roles, right? There's a watching out that we need to do. And how do we watch out? Well, you need to know the truth so you can spot the counterfeit. You need to know Jesus, and you need to know him well. And that's knowing the word, right? You need to know what he says, those kinds of things, right? Not letting yourself be deceived, knowing the truth. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. There's another command. Don't be alarmed. Don't freak out thinking, okay, well, this is it then. So there's those things. But then here we get into verse 9, but you be on your guard. They will hand you over, you'll do all these different things. Be on your guard. And then 10, it is necessary that the gospel be preached to all nations. So when they arrest you and hand you over, don't worry beforehand what you will say, but say whatever is given to you at that time, for it isn't you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. And so it seems as though he's saying, A, don't freak out. This stuff is going to happen, and this stuff has been happening, and it's going to keep happening. And then B, be faithful to the ministry of the gospel as though it's happening tomorrow. Be ready. Don't be deceived. Share the gospel faithfully and trust in the Holy Spirit when you're out there sharing, because he's going to give you what to say.
And be ready to be persecuted.
Yeah.
You will not win the favor of everybody just because you're a kind person.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. In fact, 13, you will be hated by everyone because of my name, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Be ready now.
Be ready now.
And don't freak out.
Don't freak out. Preach the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I view the being ready now as preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
Hey, get out there. Get ready. People need to get saved because there's going to be a point to where you can't preach the gospel to unsaved people anymore.
Yeah.
And so...
that's kind of like the parable that we were talking about, was that last week in chapter 12 of the tenants of like... Yeah. He's consistently sending his messengers. But at some point, he's going to stop sending messengers and just bring judgment. Mm-hmm. And that day's coming. Mm-hmm. So be ready for that day.
Yeah.
So we keep going, keep sending the message. People got to respond.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, you guys want to move on to the rest of the chapter?
To the light stuff?
To the easy stuff.
Just kidding.
All right, so we will continue here with the rest of the chapter, which is verses 14 through 37. I'll read it here. It says, "But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down, nor enter his house to take anything out. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not happen in winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of the creation that God created until now, and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short the days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'Look, there he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be on guard. I have told you all these things beforehand. But in those days after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth, and to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven or the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, keep awake, for you do not know when the time it will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I shall say to all, stay awake. All right. That is signs of the end times in Mark chapter 13. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go around and present a little bit on the different views. We'll talk about each one as we go here. But there's three main views of the end times throughout Christianity, and then there's also variations of all these views. There's got to be hundreds of variations of every view within Christianity. I mean, like, there's so many different little nuances and nitpicks, but we're just going to kind of present the main three views, talk about them a little bit. So those views are the preterist position, which would be that these things have happened, these things have taken place. Then there's also variations within that of maybe some parts have taken place, some parts haven't. Then there is the Futurist View, which is that all these things are yet to come. They still will be fulfilled in the future. And then there's kind of a combo view, which plays with both. And there's different ways you can talk about that as well. But we'll start with Brent, talking about the preterist view.
Okay. Well, the preterist view, as Jesse just mentioned, is a view that Matthew or Mark 13 is largely historic, that most everything that happened there, it happened in the first century. And I'm going to make a case for that view here for a moment, but I'm going to go to Luke chapter 21 to make that case. And it's important to realize that there are three parallel passages on this Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And each of those chapters bring out some new information. And so in order to understand Mark 13, you really need to also study Matthew 24, and you need to also study Luke 21. And I think Luke 21 is the easiest place to see a preterist view. So I'm just going to go through it real quick. And so Luke 21, when Jesus begins to discuss the future, starting in verse 8, when he says, don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name claiming I am the Messiah. So even in the first century, there was a lot of folks that rose up claiming to be the Messiah. Historically, Josephus talks about that and how there were many messianic figures. He was a first century historian. Some of these false prophets even purportedly promised miraculous interventions and did signs and miracles, at least purportedly. And then he talks about rumors of wars in we talked about this, but 9 and verse 9 and 11, Luke 21. And again, historical sources such as Josephus and the Roman historian Tacitus report that this did indeed take place during that era. And Josephus was the eyewitness to Jerusalem's destruction. He describes wars and uprisings, earthquakes, famines. He even reports extraordinary signs and omens in the sky before the Roman siege. Tacitus also records fearful events and great signs from heaven during that same period. And we get down to verse 12, time of great persecution. And that seems to describe the life of the apostles and the believers in the first century. You know, their persecution was well documented. And then we get down to verse 20, and it says, "And you'll see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Then you will know that the time of its destruction has arrived. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills." That is a big warning of the coming destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Emperor Titus. And both authors, Luke or I think Matthew and Mark, say, "Let the reader beware." It's kind of interesting. You readers pay attention to this, because you Jews here, just in a few short years, life is going to be really difficult for you. And if you don't escape right away, you're going to be toast. And then he talks about the abomination of desolation entering the temple. And that talks about in Mark 13, 14 verses, and then Matthew 24. And a lot of historians just view that is how the Roman soldiers, they breached the city, they entered the temple precincts, they set up their military standards with their emblems representing the Roman gods and the emperor. They set it all up in the temple area. They desecrated the temple, and they'll look at that historical incident as the sacrilege thing that was the abomination that was set up into the temple. But the key verse really is verse 24. They says that they will be killed by the sword, sent away as captives, the Jews, to all the nations of the world, and Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. And that verse seems to be really clear that that God had a purpose for the nation of Israel up until 70 AD. Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles, the Romans, until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. We're in that period of the Gentiles where the gospel is going out to all the world. And then there's a big time gap probably between verse 24 and 25. And verse 25 says, "And there'll be strange signs in the sun, moon, and stars." Now, some preterists will say that happened as well. The partial preterist position is say that is yet to come, and there's a big time gap there. But it's interesting, like I mentioned, Tacitus, Josephus said that they were quoted as that there were signs in the heavens that came right before the destruction of Jerusalem. So the preterist position says the whole chapter already happened. Well, I tend to think that there's a time gap between verse 24 and 25, and the strange signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Here on the earth, nations will be in turmoil, perplexed by the roaring seas and strange tides. People will be terrified at what they see coming upon the earth, and powers in the heavens will be shaken, and everybody will see the Son of Man coming on a cloud with a power and great glory. That's yet to come. So that's a preterist position that most all of this has already happened until they're right there at verse 25. Although the serious preterists will say that even happened too.
Right. Yeah. Some will say it's like there was like an invisible coming, or it was God's judgment coming down, and that you can't see. You couldn't see Christ coming, but it was just like and then there's an actual second coming still happening, but that this was kind of like a second coming.
And a little bit of it is it's apocalyptic language, not necessarily to be taken literally, just like some of the apocalyptic, easy for me to say, language in the book of Revelation. Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So, and it seems like maybe some of the initial weaknesses of that view, kind of depending on how you take a look at what Tacitus or Josephus said, right, does it account for the signs, the cosmic signs, those kinds of things?
Right.
Maybe not, so but it's, and then, some people would argue that this view kind of downplays the second coming a little bit. But
I think another weakness of it that kind of comes to mind is that there seems to be a direct connection from this passage into places like Daniel 9 and Revelation. What was it? Revelation 14 with the beast. Is that right? There is Revelation 13. One of those. I was just looking at it earlier. where it makes mention of this something similar, where they'll associate the abomination of desolation with the beast, the coming of the beast. So if that's what the beast is, and then there's the connection of the 42 months, so the 3.5 years, and then Christ comes back. So if you take the partial preterist view, where it's the abomination of desolation happened, and now Christ is going to still come back, but that's a future. There's a big gap in there that kind of negates that 42 months thing. Like, is that a figurative 42 months? Is that 3.5 years a figurative 3.5 years, where it's not actually the full span, or that we're in that and it was just like a symbolic thing, or was it actually supposed to be like a 3.5 years? So there's supposed to be this event with the abomination and desolation, and then Christ comes back 3.5 years later, right?
Right.
Am I making sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Is it symbolic language?
Yeah. Is it symbolic language, or is it literal? And I think the preterist view would have to say that it was symbolic, or at least the partial preterist view would have to say it's symbolic.
Right.
The futurists would say that it's literal.
It's literal. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the preterist view?
No, I just think it's pretty strong. Verse in 24. It seems that the Luke narrative, the way Luke does it, is a pretty strong chronological order here. That everything happens before verse 24 and before is historically for sure has happened. And it's possible that after it, that a large part of that has happened as well, depending on how you understand the language. So anyway.
Yeah. My turn?
Your turn. Futurist
View.
Future.
Yeah. So the futurist view, just basically holds that much of what Jesus is describing in Mark 13 is talking about future global events that lead up to his second coming. And so there's a lot of these verses, like in verse 2, that do clearly apply to the first century. Futurists would say that the most intense moments in the chapter, cosmic signs, global tribulation, and the return of Christ have yet to happen. So a lot of that is held in the futurist view. People hold this view across denominations, partially in part because of the verses 24 through 27, there's like future-oriented language. He speaks of apocalyptic, wow, that's hard for me to say too, apocalyptic signs. The sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light. The Son of Man comes in clouds with great power and glory. And they're saying, well, that's coming. That hasn't happened yet, and so it goes far beyond, that's what they would say, right? It goes far beyond what happened in 70 AD, and so they say, well, seems pretty cosmic and visible and final, referring to what's coming, and it does harken back to Daniel 7, where it describes the Son of Man receiving this everlasting dominion, right? And so they say that Jesus is intentionally quoting that stuff to show his eventual reign. Okay, but then there's a New Testament consistency. Look at 1 Thessalonians 4. And Matthew 24 as well, to where they both describe a visible return of Christ, right? Angels gathering the elect, and then this final reckoning, I guess you'd say. And so that's why they hold this view, right? And then Revelation 6 through 19, we see lots of these same themes, tribulation, persecution, signs in the sky that are visible that people are seeing, and the gathering of God's people. So for the futurist, Mark 13 isn't just like an isolated event. It's or a moment. It's part of this big, unified, like biblical prophecy. And then, in verse 10, the gospel must first be preached to all nations. That hadn't happened by AD 70, which we talked about also before that, because there are other letters, epistles that Paul had written to where it says it has.
Where the gospel has been preached under all of creation.
All of creation, which you're like, well, that sounds pretty uniform.
Yep.
But we do know, right, that, hey, there's people that haven't heard it. So what specifically does he mean there? We're not going into that this time, but this is part of also why futurists hold this view to where, hey, even now this is ongoing, and this future-oriented like mission kind of frames the chapter in more global terms. So yeah, the flow, man, I went even into the flow of Mark 13 here. So, verses 1 and 2, the temple's destroyed, right? This is how they interpret it in 80-70. That's what's coming. 3 through 13, there's birth pains. We have pre-trib signs like false messiahs. We've got wars. We've got persecution. Then we have 14, the abomination of desolation. So futurists hold that, hey, this is in the future. It's tied to like the 2 Thessalonians Antichrist. Then we have 15, verses 15 through 23. This is the Great Tribulation, Daniel 12, Revelation 7. That's the kind of stuff that's coming. Verses 24 through 27 of Mark 13. This is the second coming of Christ in all of his glory. And then you get to 28 through 37. Hey, be ready. This is urgent. Be ready and endure. Yeah. So I think that there's some strengths to this view. You look at it, you're like, this sounds like pretty cosmic stuff. And when you're looking back, even in 21, 24, Luke 21, 24, I'm just a little excited right now. The times of the Gentiles, futurists, Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So this phrase isn't in Mark or Matthew. Futurists hold it, this is this long gap of the church age. And so that's why it's interesting, because futurists would hold that and say, see, it's the future because there's this long gap, and then we get to 20. So it's interesting. There are some weaknesses to this view as well, though, right? Because, it talks about a specific generation, like this generation. This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. That's something you got to wrestle through. This is the future. What does the generation mean?
What does the generation mean?
And that's how futurists respond, right? It could mean race. It can mean type of people. It can mean the generation alive where these things began. So they think that could mean a lot of different things. I'm not a futurist.
I've heard it all over the place. Like one generation after the statehood of Israel in 1948.
Right.
So what's a generation?
Exactly.
People have speculated 40 years. So 1988, there was a huge interest that maybe, this is it. One generation after the statehood of Israel coming back as a nation again. And now we're another 40 years after that, practically.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's why Evergreen started, right, in 1988. I'm kidding.
It's well, it didn't end. We need a new church.
Well, we just shut down, but I guess, no, I'm kidding. Okay. And another weakness of this, and we see this, I think, a lot. We've seen this all over the place, and we talked about it earlier, but it leads to a lot of speculation that can be unhelpful, I think. Really, and Jesus talks about this later in Mark 13. Maybe stop freaking out about when specifically it's not going to happen. Even the Son doesn't know when it's going to happen. The angels don't know. So you're probably not going to figure it out as well based on cosmological signs and these kinds of different things. And, when we work so hard to try to predict times or identify the Antichrist, it's burned a lot of people for a lot of years. And so I think there's not a lot of fruit there. And even preaching on these kinds of things, you got to be really careful to point to Jesus, not to fear like certain dates that are coming up, or watch if the moon is a super blood moon or something like that. Right?
So, Mr. Futuristic, where are you placing the tribulation and the rapture?
I said I wasn't a futurist. And the rapture is a hotly debated item as well.
It certainly is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I think another challenge to the futurist view is it often overlooks the first century audience who this was spoken to. He's speaking to his disciples, Jesus, on the Mount of Olives. And so a futurist has to get the context of that too, and not just say, he's changing it all, and he's only speaking to people there in the future, things like that. So they have to get the context and understand what this meant for the disciples who were hearing this at the time too. So, yeah, that's a futurist view.
Yeah. I think a big strength of the futurist view is that you can kind of combine combine and harmonize a lot of these passages, like the Daniel passages, the Thessalonians, Revelation, all four of the Gospels. You can kind of bring all of these together and say, yes, this is all things that are going to happen like this, and this, and we don't have to like stretch numbers or like try to play the games of like, okay, well, this kind of lines up with this, but this also kind of lines up with this, but does this equal that, or are these two separate things? You don't really have to play those games. You can just kind of say like, yeah, this is all going to happen in the future, and we'll just wait and see how it plays out.
Yeah, I've got strengths too that I wrote down.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, one, I think the sun going dark and the stars falling, that sounds pretty serious, and now a solar eclipse could be the sun going dark and shooting stars could be the stars falling, but I think that futurists can kind of take Jesus more seriously there in some of those things. And it does align with Revelation and other New Testament prophecy as well. So there's a strength there, like let's look at Revelation and these two seem to kind of line up a little bit, and it keeps the church expectant. And that is one thing I like about it. Like you were saying, hey, be ready because this stuff is coming. Be ready. Instead of this all happened in AD 70, so we're good.
So be ready for something.
yeah, but we don't know what.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think anytime, instead of responding with fear, if you respond with a deep longing for Jesus' return, you're probably doing all right. You're doing all right, and that lines up with other places in Scripture as well. But it also makes room for a more global application of Mark 13 as opposed to just a local application of Mark 13. The gospel's for all nations, and the tribulation impacts everybody, not just these people who are hearing this at the time. But yeah. Any
other thoughts on that, Brent?
No, sir.
All right. Well, the last kind of view is kind of the most flexible of the views, I think, and that's why I like it the most.
Fence sitter.
Yeah, I'm a big fence sitter, which is kind of like you kind of combine the views. So the combo view would be, you can take it in a couple different ways. You could take it in like the partial preterist view of like, okay, so these parts were fulfilled, these parts were not fulfilled, and you can kind of play the game of like which ones weren't, which ones were. But I take it more in the sense of kind of a dual fulfillment perspective of when we look at prophecies. There's a lot of prophecy in Scripture that has like an immediate fulfillment that fulfills it, but to a lesser extent. And then those are the things that we see as like patterns, and they'll happen, and there'll be different types that kind of come up. So we see like in the Old Testament, one of the things we talk about when we try to look for Jesus in the Old Testament is typology. There's a lot of types of Christ. There's a lot of people who have the role of being God's anointed and fulfill it to a certain extent, but not fully until we get Jesus coming onto the picture. And he is the fulfillment. He fills full the role of what the anointed one is, what the Christ is, what the Messiah is. And so I see that within the combo view. I think that's what this would kind of be, is that there might be an immediate lesser fulfillment of these predictions with the Abomination of Desolation, the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Or even before Jesus, there was a view that tied in with Daniel 9 with Maccabees, which was an intertestamental writing, part of the Apocrypha, which recounts the Maccabean revolution where Antiochus, was it Antiochus?
I think so, where the pig was sacrificed.
Pig was sacrificed on the altar
in the temple.
In the temple, and so he said this is like the Abomination of Desolation, referring back to Daniel 9. But he's saying it's like a type of that thing. He wasn't saying like this is that thing, but there is this type, and so there's kind of precedent for that these types can happen. So yeah, this view would be kind of that these things have happened, they do happen, they will continue to happen. But ultimately, one day there will be a fulfillment of that thing, and we'll be able to look back and be like, oh yeah, this is clearly how this was all supposed to play out. In the past, there's been things that kind of hinted toward this and pointed towards this and could look like a fulfillment of this thing. But really, in the end, it's ultimately what we see in the end. And so it's kind of it'll turn out how it turns out kind of view. And so I think that's both the strength and weakness of it, is that it can kind of mean anything, so you don't have to take like a hard position anywhere with any of these predictions. But also it's like we can kind of twist the words of Jesus to say anything, and kind of takes a little bit of the power of what he's saying out of it, of like, no, Jesus is making predictions here, and that is like a very clear thing, right? And especially in Luke, it seems like he's very specifically talking about the destruction of the temple. Like that seems like the context would be very much more so than in Mark 20 or Mark 13 and Matthew 24.
Right. Certainly does.
Yeah, and like so much so like that is such a striking prediction. So much so that like skeptic scholars will date Mark later and later till after 70 AD because they're like, yeah, there's no way he actually predicted that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Where less skeptic scholars will be like, no, there's actually a lot of evidence that suggests that this was written pre all that because. But the assumption from skeptic scholars is like Jesus isn't Lord, so he couldn't have predicted this thing, and so like it's such a specific prediction. It kind of takes away a little bit of that power when you say, well, it's just like a type thing. Like he just saw the patterns of the world and said this is gonna be how things go. Yeah, I think it's kind of a brief summary of that. Any thoughts?
And there's a lot of prophecies that are like that. I think
yeah,
you mentioned right that are kind of the already and the not yet.
Yeah. So we see a few of those. We mentioned a little bit, we were talking about a little bit before we started recording. A couple of them would be like the promise to David with his son, that he's going to have a son that's going to sit on his throne, that he's going to build the temple. And so we obviously point to that and say that that's a prediction about Jesus because he says his throne's going to last forever. But we also say that there's an immediate fulfillment of that, and to a lesser extent with Solomon, who actually built the physical temple, took on his throne, because then there's also the bit in there about how he's going to, when he commits iniquity, the Lord's going to strike him with a rod, he's going to discipline him. And it's like, well, Jesus didn't commit any iniquities, so he didn't really fulfill that part of it, but Solomon fulfilled that part, but Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of what this was supposed to look like. Or the prophecy from Isaiah about the virgin birth, where we think about that and we're like, oh yeah, of course it was predicted in the Old Testament that Jesus would be born of a virgin, right? And it's like, then you go back and you read that passage, in the context of that passage, is they're talking about a sign that's going to be to that king in that time. And so there's an immediate fulfillment of that prediction, but there's also like some typology stuff that has to do with the Messiah that's going to come later, that's going to fill that thing full, not just be the lesser immediate sign that happens. Yeah,
It's a very convenient.
It's very convenient. Yeah,
but there are so many of those dual fulfillment prophecies that you do kind of have to give it some license,
right?
And as we noted before, we may not know of dual fulfilled prophecy until after it happens.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And as we look back, we think, oh my gosh, it was God had an intention for that prophecy more than I even thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you get to Matthew 1 and, people are like, oh, the virgin birth. That's okay, obviously. Yeah. Whereas at the time that probably made a lot of sense in Isaiah, when they heard that.
Yeah. They weren't reading that and going like, oh, the Messiah is going to be born of a virgin.
Right.
They're like,
right.
Oh yeah. That's the thing that Isaiah said to, what was it? Hezekiah.
Right.
I think. And yeah, it's like, oh yeah. And then there's that sign.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. Well, any other thoughts on kind of the three big end times views?
No, I just think it's important to see that there are good-hearted Christians that have three different views, at least three, and there's, like I said earlier, there's nuances in all those. Good-hearted Christians that take different views on these things, and that ought to give us a little bit of humility. Number one, that if we think we have it all figured out, we might not just have it all figured out. But two, that we respect other people, other believers who may have a little bit different view on end times things. This is not something to argue about, but to rally around. I think we all believe that Jesus Christ is coming back.
Yeah.
And we'll get to the things that really rally us here in just a moment. Is that what's the implication of just the big thing that Jesus Christ is coming back and the kingdom is going to get set up and we're going to be a part of that. Now, how it gets there might take a little different paths, and I got a feeling we're all going to be surprised.
Oh yeah.
But the big thing is Jesus is coming back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the important thing to remember, is that like it is a conversation amongst brothers and sisters, right? This is not like a, man, you're a futurist and that means that we can't fellowship together anymore. Like right. I can't be your brother. We can't have communion together. It's like, no, we can agree to disagree on these things and hold them kind of with an open hand.
Yeah, and I think there's an implication that I just wouldn't mind sharing as far as teaching of the church. I've had a lot of requests over the years on, well, why don't you get into detailed discussions on end times prophecy? And first of all, I'm just not sure that I'm completely convinced that's the most edifying thing of the church to understand completely how all this end time stuff works, as much as it's that we become really convinced that this world is going to end and the kingdom of God will prevail and Jesus Christ is going to come back, and the implications to that for us living, I think is a much bigger deal.
Yeah, that's good. That kind of goes back to that section from the beginning, that our job is to preach the good news, right? Preach the gospel, not necessarily preach when he's going to come back and try to figure out all that and figure out all the details around it and stuff. It's just like, hey, you're a sinner. You need to repent. Jesus is coming back.
But you better be watching, and if the temple gets rebuilt in Jerusalem, then you better pay attention.
Once you see the abomination of desolation, you know.
Then we'll do a new episode and we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good place to kind of transition here and just like talk about what the implications of this are. Like, what does this mean for us? How should we respond? What's Jesus' desired response from us in these teachings?
Yeah, well, I think one is just to be we were just talking, be spiritually alert, like be ready, gird the loins of your mind, you know, and the signs, whether it's these things are first century or today, the world isn't permanent. Like you said, the world's not going to stay the way it is right now, and Jesus is going to come back, and there's a readiness we need. We shouldn't be sleepwalking throughout life. We need to be ready, So it's like the thing you say to your kids, or the thing that goes on in youth group, like, are you living as though Jesus will return tomorrow or tonight, or whatever. And I think that there's a lot of that implication here in this. It's just, hey, be ready.
Right.
Be ready. Regardless of whether this is end time stuff or 70 AD stuff, be ready, because people need to hear the gospel. People are, what does Proverbs 24 say? Hold back those staggering toward the slaughter. Like there's something that Jesus wants for us here. So I think that's a big one. I think another one, cling to his word, right? If we look at verse 31, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. There's stuff shifting and people are freaking out everywhere, which this chapter also talks about. But what are you building your life on? Is it safety and security? Well, as soon as these wars that are coming, or these famines or these things, these earthquakes hit, your foundation gets tested. And if it's in Christ, you'll be good. But yeah, and then just last one here, I just live with urgency, the urgency that comes from knowing that there is a time coming, even though I may not know when that time is coming, not anxiety. And that's where I think a lot of these conversations go, is people get really anxious about, the moon or the stars or these things look this way. So, man, what's going to happen? Should I invest in my 401k or not?
Or should I go to the middle of Montana and set up a survivalist compound because things are going to get real tough?
Right. Which, boy, that seems to kind of fly in the face of what Jesus is trying to say here in Mark 13. Pay attention, but don't freak out. We don't obsess about prophecy charts, like, the map of the red strings everywhere and you're kind of freaking out. No, live faithfully and watchfully for Jesus' return and share the gospel.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I think each of the parallel passages kind of gives an interesting twist. It's a little different than each of the passages. I just want to read them quickly. It says in Mark 13, after the lesson of the fig tree, he says, however, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself, which is an interesting verse, that there was something that the Son himself didn't know. Only the Father knows, and since you don't know when that time will come, be on guard, stay alert. There is a day coming when this world will be over. Everything that we know about and that we've invested in is going to cease. Be on guard. Stay alert. Then it says in Matthew, it says this: when the Son of Man returns, it'll be like it was in Noah's day. In those days before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up to the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them all away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. 2 men will be working together in the field. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. So you too must keep watch, for you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Now, some people will look at that. Is that talking about the rapture? One will be taken, one will be left. What probably is what it's be talking about is one person is going to be taken away in judgment. But the point is still the same, is there's going to be an end, and we're going to stand before God, and we're going to give an account to our life. And we're going to either give an account because we believed in the gospel and rewarded, or we're not going to be believing in the gospel and we're going to face our end. And so there's this big emphasis: keep watch, stay alert, don't be sleeping. This could happen at any moment. But my favorite one is in Luke 21, where it says, watch out. Don't let your hearts be dulled by carousing and drunkenness and by the worries of this life. Don't let that day catch you unaware like a trap, for that day will come upon everyone living on the earth. Keep alert at all times and pray that you'll be strong enough to escape these coming horrors and stand before the Son of Man. And our hearts are not to be dulled by allowing our lives to go down a road where it's dissipating. And I think it's so interesting that he places the worries right alongside drunkenness and carousing. And worries can let our hearts become dulled. And the warning here is, don't let your heart become dull. And keep yourself from influences that will dull your hearts, but allow yourself to be influenced by things that will sharpen your hearts. And it makes me think, golly, how serious is worry here? That it can dull our hearts. And so it's be alert, be ready. This life isn't going to keep going on. And are you going to be glad when Jesus Christ comes back and he finds you doing what you're doing at that moment, or not?
Yeah, and I think that it's safe to say even that, you know, if I look at verse 34, like you said, be on your guard so that your minds are not dulled from carousing, drunkenness, and worries of life, or that day will come on you unexpectedly like a trap. I mean, you even some of these worries, being so focused on when Jesus is coming back, can keep you from doing the very thing he wanted you to do in the first place. That's not good.
Yeah. I think that that image of like he's coming back. How is he going to find you? You know, I think of like since we stopped meeting at my house for the young adults group, like I used to have like such a solid schedule of like cleaning up, picking up, like having all my chores done, because I'm like, I got people coming over every week. I gotta get this thing settled, and then like it got a lot harder to like keep that schedule up when I don't have people coming over constantly. And then my mom will be like, "Hey, I'm coming over. I'll be there in like 15 minutes." I'm like, I gotta clean stuff up, and I'm just like scurrying around trying to like hide all my junk that's been laying around for like 3 weeks, and just be like,
throw it all in the closet.
Yeah. So it's like it's that image. Like, am I going to be happy with the life that Jesus finds me living when he comes back, or am I going to be scurrying to hide all my junk that's been sitting around that I haven't dealt with because I've been getting lazy and not staying on guard?
Yeah, and the thing that I've been challenged with is don't let your hearts be dulled. What am I doing that's dulling my heart? Too much TV? Is that dulling my heart? Is it endless scrolling on social media? Is that dulling my heart? You know, carousing, dissipation. It's not that I'm drunk, but there are things that I can do that would dull my heart. I don't think the Lord wants my heart to be dulled.
Yeah, I think there's good things too that can dull your heart. Even outside of that, you can be so busy with different things with your family that your heart can get dulled, by trying to please your family, do all these different things and make sure they get all the experiences they want, in life, and those kinds of things with your kids. That can dull your whole family's heart.
And I think as we back away from Mark 13, we've talked about this a little bit, but what other life lessons can we pull out of it? One is just be ready that life could be really tough. Be ready that we're not guaranteed the American dream here, right? What's the American dream? Every generation is more comfortable and richer than the next. Well, I don't think we're guaranteed that. There is a healthy expectation that we can have and should have that life could get very difficult. Persecution could really happen. That famines, earthquakes, wars, all sorts of things could happen. And this American system could fall apart for us. I'm not putting my hope in this American system, but I am putting my hope in Jesus, and with a realization that, hey, things could get tough. Am I ready for that? And so that's one thing I take away from this passage. And the other thing is that God's in control. God's in control. He's got a view of what's going to happen into this world, and he's organizing world events for the greater good of us spreading the gospel and organizing the world events in such a way for him to come back. And it reminds me of those verses in Psalm 46, be still. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the world. And be still, I'm completely in control. And we can rest in that.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, anything else we want to cover here from Mark chapter 13?
I'm glad we cleared up all the confusion, though.
We did clear up all the confusion.
So just let us know in a comment which one you are. No, just kidding. Just kidding. You don't have to do that.
Preterist.
Futurist.
Well, futurist and
Dual
wishy-washy.
fulfillment. And fence sitter.
Fence sitter. I'm a professional fence sitter. All right. Well, that was great. So thank you guys for joining me for this conversation and putting all this work into kind of prepping for this one. This chapter always has a little bit more prep that needs to go into it than other chapters. But we will continue on with the Gospel of Mark. We've got just 3 chapters left of the entire Gospel, which is crazy. It feels like we just started and now we're almost done. But it's been such a blast, such a blessing to me. I hope it's been a blessing to you guys. I hope it's been a blessing to you who listen. Because that's who we're doing this for. So if you guys have any questions or comments or stuff, maybe this would be a great one to have like a follow-up Q&A episode. If you guys got questions that you want us to talk about, if we got enough of them, send them in. We'll do something. We'll figure it out. Or just in general for the Gospel of Mark, if you have questions, maybe we'll do something at the end to kind of recap it. I don't know. We'll figure it out. It all kind of depends on you guys. But let us know. You can reach out to us at podcast@hometownchurch.com. If you're watching on YouTube, know that we've got audio versions of this to take us on the go. You can listen to us. If you're listening to us on audio platforms, we do have it on YouTube. You can watch us talk about this kind of stuff too. But for now, we'll see you next time.
See ya.